this could be applied to so many, if not all areas of your life. It's not just an artistic thing. It could be problem solving in business. It could be having a conversation with someone that you're having conflict with. It could be an internal idea or struggle that you're working through. And so we want to talk in this context, in this conversation, about creativity as a very macro idea that can be applied in multiple different areas.
Welcome to The Shift, where we search for ways to do better by thinking better.
Whether you're going through a major life change, looking to deepen your understanding of yourself, or hoping to improve your relationships with others, The Shift is here for you.
We're your hosts, Isla and Yashar, an endlessly curious sister and brother team.
As certified brain-based executive coaches with backgrounds in medicine and management, we combine the neurosciences, performance psychology, strategic planning methodology, and mindfulness techniques to empower your transformation from the inside out.
Join us in conversation as we explore better ways to show up for ourselves and each other. Hi, friends. Welcome back to another episode of The Shift. Today, we're tackling the topic of flow versus force. Now, this topic came into conversation for us based on an article Yasha wrote on the neuroscience of creativity. And so we decided to bring that topic to the podcast today and have you join the conversation. How do you find out within your own body what is force and what is you in flow? How do you find that alignment? What tools do you use? Yasha is definitely going to take us through the science of it all. So on that note, how would you like to get started with this conversation, Yash?
I think there's a few parameters we have to set up. This whole idea about flow versus force, what does that actually mean? What is the science behind flow as a term, not just as a pretty idea? When we are in flow, ultimately, what's the outcome of it, which is creativity? And we'll define high level what that means and how it could be applied to many different situations. And of course, the most important thing I think in this conversation is we're going to go through some of the parameters that have to be in place for the mind and body to enter in flow a little more easily. Off the hop, I would say that flow itself as a scientific topic is very rich. It's very interesting. And in this conversation, we're not going to go diving into, the nooks and crannies of the science behind flow. That is something that I highly encourage anyone interested in to do some background research and to learn more about it, because it really can be something that expedites the way you come to resolution in problems, the way you up-level skills, and generally how good you can feel when you find your own tools to get into flow. In this conversation in particular, as I mentioned, we want to talk on a macro level so that you have tools to apply to your own life in whichever thing it is that you are trying to solve or work through or just generally feel more confident in. So to begin with, let's talk about creativity and what that is, and then we'll talk a little bit about flow, and then we'll get into tools. Does that sound like a reasonable way to work through this, Isla?
Let's do it.
So creativity from a brain science speak is nonlinear thinking. That means there's no pre-existing or easy answer to what you're trying to solve, what you're trying to create anew. It's usually harder to do. And the reason why it's harder to do is because as far as you know it, at this point in your experience, there's no answer to what you're trying to solve. There's no easy roadmap to what you're trying to solve. So there needs to be some work that goes into it. And once you reach an insight, once you have that aha moment, there's a new mental map in your brain. There's a coming together of ideas, which once may have been distant ideas or not even relevant ideas you may have thought at that point, but they're starting to merge together and start to come together like Lego pieces to form this new idea, this new perspective, this new understanding of what's going on. And when you hit this aha moment, there's a high frequency wavelength that happens in all parts of the brain. It's actually the only time where all parts of your brain are starting to talk to each other at the same time. It's called a gamma wave, and it's promoted with a feel-good feeling because you get a dopamine release, which again, as many of you know, is a feel-good chemical, but also it helps you feel more motivated to continue down the path of learning, of identifying what other ideas can come together. And so this self-reward, self-motivating idea of creativity is really exciting. And that's why we feel so good when insights come up. And so once this mental map is created, once you have this feel good energy within you that you're starting to put ideas together and solutions are starting to arise, this is what creativity is really about. And this is what we say is a mind shift, where you have a new perspective and a new idea about what you're currently facing. This could be applied to so many, if not all areas of your life. It's not just an artistic thing. It could be problem solving in business. It could be having a conversation with someone that you're having conflict with. It could be an internal idea or struggle that you're working through. And so we want to talk in this context, in this conversation, about creativity as a very macro idea that can be applied in multiple different areas. Now, because we started this conversation touching upon the science and giving kind of a high level look at it, I want to throw it to you, Isla, for a second, because I know you do a lot of creative work in your life outside of MindShift. And so when you hear this explanation of creativity, what comes up for you and how do you feel like it resonates with the work you're doing in your artistic life?
As you were talking, I found it really fascinating because I thought, well, I'd never think of it this way. You know, I would almost describe it as like creativity is a place where I don't think, knowing that that is not true, actually. And everything that you're saying definitely applies. I just usually see it from a different perspective. So I have this saying that I say that, anything that's meant to be born through you will find a way. And that's kind of how I see creativity in and of itself. This idea that these insights, these pings, these tings, these maybe notes of intuition will come to you, this knowing or an idea, and it asks you to birth it. And usually that's how it happens for me. And so that doesn't mean that I can even bring it to realization right away. I have an ongoing list of ideas I've had, in for years, decades sometimes, that I have yet to bring into fruition, and other things that I'll have an idea and I'll go forward with it because it's the right time and place. And so, things like retreats that have been percolating for over 6 years to the idea of a novel that I put into works within a year, So as you were talking, I was trying to place these things in my life, like, was that not born yet? And like, why did this go really fast? And I don't know if I have a great answer for it. I know for me is, my personal website and my personal brand is like, I create, therefore I am. So I know it's a vital like life source for me. Without creativity, without that curiosity to put new into the world or just experience new for myself, I wouldn't cease to be alive. And I think that's true for most people. They might just articulate it differently or realize it differently. So I don't know if I have a clear answer to your question of how I see this, but as you were talking, I was definitely thinking like, how do I see my creativity? How do I ever think of it as me solving a problem and I'm not sure. Definitely, for example, like writing a book currently, there's deadlines. There are problems I have to solve through it. So it's not like it's all just, in the clouds. There is some very practical things you have to go through to put something out into the world. But I think in that moment of creating, I am connected to something outside of myself, in all honesty. Like some sort of source energy is coming through me and I am putting what is meant to be out. So I think this actually leads perfectly to the other part where we're going to talk about a flow versus force, because that only happens in a container usually for me. It can't be something I'm forcing. I usually have to put parameters in place to allow that space for that source energy, that flow energy to actually come through me so I can create at the level that I'm speaking to right now. So maybe that's a great segue to the parameters you were talking about earlier, because that is one thing I know to be true, that all of this is only possible when you can do certain things to connect with yourself in that way.
Yeah, I think you touched on a bunch of things that I want to comment on. Number one, it's absolutely a birthright for everyone. Creativity is not something selected for, only those who know how to do some sort of artistic, whether it be music, photography, pottery, drawing, whatever. Like it's not an artistic thing alone. There's much art to it, but it's definitely something that everyone has a birthright to. And I think part of this conversation is saying that out loud and really taking a stance and saying creativity is for everyone and can be applied everywhere in one's life. And so there's that part of it. The second thing you said that I want to touch upon is you talked about struggle and the idea of Sometimes there's struggle, sometimes there feels like there's less struggle. I would say it's just a degree of struggle that you felt in that moment, because in the actual science of how the brain works to get to flow, there's always struggle. And
Okay.
there's always an element, of course, with certain ideas, certain problem sets, there's going to be more struggle. And the better you get at a skill, the level of struggle you can handle that's under your threshold of identifying probably goes up. And just like maybe an example of someone who goes skiing for the first time, the bunny hill is enough of a struggle. But, after however many years and really dedicating themselves to learning that skill, the black diamond or the double black diamond becomes like the next threshold of, wow, this is where the struggle lies for me to up my level, up my skill set. And
Okay. So
so,
that kind of plays into the other things we've always talked about, like inventory and like your stretch zones, etc. Like on other podcasts about like once you stretch outside your current comfort zone, move into a stretch zone, you've built new inventory. So then the struggle is you have different muscles, you have different tools.
yeah, absolutely. And it's important to bring that up because I think a lot of times when we use words like flow, it sounds so pretty,
Mhm.
and we can assume that we're doing it wrong if we're in struggle. And I want to say, no, you're actually probably well on your way to flow if you're within a stretch zone and you're not going from day one of skiing into the double black diamond, because that's just silly and you're going to hurt yourself, if not
Right.
kill yourself. So that's the part where we have to be mindful. But most of often, I find people actually just hang out on the bunny hill, the proverbial bunny hill of life, way too long. And it's time to move out of that zone and into a stretch zone and challenge oneself. So you do have those butterflies. You do have that feeling of struggle. And in fact, it comes with neurochemicals that tell you you're stressed. And
Mhm.
that's why we avoid it, right? That's actually a signature of the struggle zone. However, if we stick to that struggle zone a little bit longer, the next step is a release zone where your brain waves change and the neurochemicals change, and you start to feel a little more of an ease. And that little slight shift of ease is actually the gateway that brings you into flow. That's when the changes in your brain waves go into insight generation. And that's when you start to feel the dopamine rush and the feel good energy. And then from there, we have to recover. We have to actually slow down, stop. We can't just stay there forever. It's not an unlimited pit of resource that we can pull from. We have to be able to go back into our recovery and be able to, the athlete or the person who likes to do a lot of physical activity knows they have to recover if they want to go back in the gym or do the exercise just as well, if not better, the next day. The artist knows that they have to be able to walk away from the craft to go back to the craft, when to walk away, drop the pen or the keyboard or the paintbrush and say, this is enough right now. I've done as much. And you're forcing the issue versus you're feeling like you're in the flow of the issue. And so that's when recovery comes
Yeah.
in,
That's
right?
interesting because just the other day, I was working on a current chapter that I'm working on, and I was kind of at a standstill. I was like, I don't know what I'm writing here. And I just like shifted to another creative activity, which was making a logo. Like I started just playing with fonts and like completely unrelated, completely nothing, but I just started playing and making a logo. And it was like the rest for my brain, staying in creative activity, but like my doodle pad or, whatever, just kind of doing something to shift to something else, work on it, and then I came back to the chapter I was working on, which was an interesting activity because instead of like leaving it completely, I was like, well, let me just play here for a while. And then my brain allowed to kind of free think and play. And, I think I had a phone call. So I just kind of like was somewhere else. And then I could come back to what I was doing.
Exactly. And then after that recovery, if you choose to go back to whatever you're working on in the first place, you'll probably enter back into an element or a level of struggle, which if you stay with it, then you'll have a little bit of a release or an understanding into a flow, insight generation heavily, and then you are out of it again and you're back into recovery. And so that's the cycle of flow. And the reason I want to talk about it again is just to identify for people that struggle is part of it. And recovery has to be part of it if you want to do the struggle better and then therefore the flow better. And it keeps going in a circular fashion. So we start with struggle, we go into release, then we go into flow. And then we should really also then prioritize recovery after the flow so we can get back into struggle in a more efficient way. And so at this point, let me talk a little bit, Isla, about what flow can feel like in oneself so we can identify that. And then we'll get into the 4 parameters we want to talk about. So there's tangible tools of making this become a reality for whoever's interested in trying this out.
Great.
The first thing I like to talk about when I talk about flow, and this is probably the part where most people struggle with, in fact, is there's this idea of a selflessness. The self vanishes to a certain point. And the way to think of that is like the self-critical mind shuts down a little bit. You're not this monkey brain that's constantly picking apart, criticizing yourself or others or the situation. That quiets down and you're in this opening, you're in this accepting or this receiving kind of state. That feeling is something that is very identifiable when you're in flow, and it is juxtaposed when you're not in flow. So when you're in flow, the self-critical mind is quieted down, which is very, very interesting and one of the benefits of flow and why people love being in flow, because they're not in that chattery, critical mind as much. The second thing that people identify when they're in flow is time begins to dilate. So it's almost like time flies when you're having fun, or time really slows down and you can really start to pick apart minor details of whatever is happening around you. And the reason this happens is because the parts of your brain that time is calculated in are knocked out. So you're actually in this like time makes no sense almost. So for some, again, it can really speed up or it can really slow down. In a place where it speeds up, it's like, again, maybe you're hanging out with friends even, or you're doing this artistic task. And all of a sudden you're like, oh my gosh, how did 2 hours just go by? I know just the other day I was working with a dog and I was loving the training that was happening, and 2 hours did go by. And I thought I was there for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes, maybe. I was in the zone. I was in the flow with this dog and what I was doing. And then when it slows down, it's when you maybe are doing a high risk activity. Again, I'll pick on skiing, when you're going down at a fast pace, but now you can really start to see the terrain really well. You can start to pick apart the angles or the path you want to take so that you get the best out of your skiing experience. You start to see things that are moving fast in a slower way. And again, for those people who play a lot of sports, you will hear athletes talk about how the game slows down. You can start to see and feel and experience a very fast event in a slower way because you're in the zone. And this is where it goes to the third thing about this idea of effortlessness. It doesn't mean you're not putting effort in. It just means the effort is matched so well to your capabilities that it moves with a sense of flow. Again, when I was working with this dog, challenges came up. They weren't causing me to stress out to the degree which I wanted to abandon the event. They gave me enough information that I could step into and start to work with. And the more I did that and the more the dog responded, the more this high reward chemical of dopamine would be released. And then the more the dog would engage with me, the more I would get excited. And then we were working together to this point where we were getting the results we wanted to get. And it's this idea of like, you know what must be done and you're ready to do it and you're sticking to it. This stick-to-itiveness, if you will, is present because—
Did you just create a new word?
I think so, but I'm going to go with it.
Stick-to-itness.
Stick-to-itiveness.
Done. You heard it here first.
Yeah, there you go. You can hashtag it and tag us if you'd like.
Stick-to-itiveness. There we go. Okay, back to what you're saying. So back to stick-to-itiveness.
Yeah, you're with it. You're feeling it because, again, you're matching your skill set with the challenge to the degree that feels very good, and you're getting that reward chemical. And then finally, you have this information richness, which I talked about a little bit earlier, where you're having this high resolution download of information in that time and space. Your pattern recognition goes up, right? So you're starting to identify, again, if you're a writer, you're starting to get words come to you. The ideas of the theme about what you're writing about start to flow. Character development feels so easy. The storyline seems to be, just moving forward. If you're talking with your friends, you're tangentially talking about all sorts of things, but it all sort of makes sense. And again, time flies when you're having fun. 2 hours later, you're like, wow, that was a great conversation. There's almost like the sense of, a dump that happens because yes, you're now going into recovery. You had your surge of the dopamine excitement, and now you're coming down off that high. These are the words I'm using to describe to you probably things you've already said in your own life. And I'm trying to help you identify how you're probably already in flow in different areas and trying to advocate that how can we add flow to areas of our lives where we don't find as exciting or we find much more challenging, so that we don't just see this as something that happens again in places that we enjoy only. So quickly, again, I'm going to go through it: selflessness, timelessness, effortlessness, and then number 4 is information richness. That's the flow part of it. But remember, you start with the struggle, you go into some sort of release, and then flow. So you got to work with the struggle. And the last thing I would say about this, Isla, is just it actually flows, pardon the pun, so well into how we do coaching. Because we always tell the clients we work with, we'll give you information, hopefully that inspires you, but it's the integration that leads to the transformation. And so we can give information, and with that information sometimes comes the struggle. The inspiration comes a little bit of the release. Okay, I'm starting to get it. But it's the integration and knowing how to apply it that the flow centers really start to open up, and the mind starts to really feel like they're able to get into this effortlessness. They're able to apply the information, understand more of the pattern recognition within the work they're doing, within the relationships in the workplace. And then that's when the transformation occurs. So I've said it probably 3-4 times already in this conversation. I don't want anyone to walk away from this episode thinking that flow is outside of their reach because they've hit struggle. It's an element that needs to be adhered to and needs to be respected so that we can earn the right to step into the flow.
Hi, friends. We have some news. We have a new course coming out this spring entitled Rethinking Productivity. Now, this course is born out of a real need we've seen within our community, with you, our dear listeners, and with our friends and family, which is everyone, to be honest, is burnt out, overwhelmed, and unable to tackle what they have to do, but sadly, unable to find the resources to tackle what they really want to do. And so we thought, just like the way we shift the way we think about leadership, we thought it was time to produce a course to shift the way we think about productivity. Like always, we gather the latest in brain-based research on insight generation, sustainable creativity, and innovation to help you build the tools and resources to optimize your creativity, to optimize your productivity from a place of authenticity and real impact. In the show notes, you'll find a link with more information. But what I want to bring your attention to is before this course launches in the spring, we're offering it 2 for 1. So when you purchase it now, you'll get this course and our Rethinking Leadership course for the price of 1. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You'll find all the information in the show notes.
So it begs the question about how to get into a flow state, now that we've identified it. And as you were talking, I definitely know what that is for me. But I also want to say that if you're confused, we're like, well, I've never felt that way. Doesn't mean you can't, and doesn't mean you won't. And it just means that maybe the factors that lead up to a flow state have to be reinvestigated a little bit. Also, I think it's a little bit of an embodiment process of the more you build your self-awareness muscles, that you understand the fine tuning a little bit. I think it's like what we said earlier, which is these are muscles that have to be built. And the more you build them, the more comfortable and accessible and also identifiable they are to you. So let's go into what are the factors, the parameters that can lead us to a flow state.
So there are 4 factors that are well within our control, each and every one of us, that can increase the chances of you becoming more creative, of you entering a flow state, or at least getting a glimpse to what that could feel like for you.
Yeah. And I just want to pause there. Again, we've been using creativity. We've been using, that as the state of the flow state. But I think a lot of athletes see it in performance. So like if you're a runner, you know what that is. If you play a sport, you know what that is. Like if you're on a team. So we can also make sure you identify these in the places that you know them already. And then of course you can apply them to other states. But I think maybe search for these at first where they are more accessible. So maybe you're not a painter, like you said, so you don't know it in that realm, but you're a runner, so you know exactly what it feels like when you're in your flow state there.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, terminology that we're all familiar with, like I'm in the pocket, I'm in the zone, time flies, that whole element of things feel different than the everyday waking moment is actually what this is. And as you said, Isla, the more we can connect to that, the easier this conversation becomes for oneself. Great. So let's start talking about these 4 factors. The first one is quiet. You might relate to the idea where you say, shh, I'm thinking. It's this quietness of surroundings, sure, but more specifically, I would say internally, quieting oneself. And the reason we want to do this is because the brain can then detect weaker or quieter neural connections. And so the less prominent, the less related, the less practiced these neural connections are, the more we need to quiet the space within ourselves and perhaps the external environment as well, to hear or connect to these ideas. Because they're not practiced, they're not automatic, they're not loud and bold and in your face. They're actually whispers. And so the quiet allows us to hear these whispers really, really well. And so the quiet is a really great way to allow the information in your unconscious or subconscious to start coming up and start connecting to other ideas and other neural connections that maybe have not been identified earlier. And again, this is where the aha feeling starts to come up. This is the feeling that you've connected pieces together and you're having some sort of headway in whatever you're trying to work through.
All of us have different types of lives, but especially those that don't have quiet lives, because maybe you have children, maybe a lot of your work is outward facing, with clients or being, going to a job. And you maybe keep like a very packed social calendar. So all of these factors, some choices, some not so much choices, mean that quiet is a rarity. When we fill all our spaces and times and, with noise, it doesn't offer that recovery space for this quiet. And I want to be really cognizant not to shame, like, why don't you have a 3-hour meditation practice? Because that's just not practical, right? So that's not really what I'm saying. But I think it's back to that baby steps is like in each day, can you carve out 5 minutes of quiet? What would that look like? For me, when I'm very overwhelmed or a lot is going on, a super still activity is actually more jarring to my system. Like someone's like, take a bath. I'm like, I don't want to take a bath, so that baby step for me is taking like the shower. And I know it seems silly, but the shower is a little bit more active than the bath for me, but it allows me to still have a moment of quiet. So look for that baby step within you. What is that difference between your bath and shower? Someone's like, sit here in meditation. And I'm like, I can't. What I can do is go for a walk. So I'm still getting that time. I'm listening to what my body needs at that moment. Because if I am in pain and grief and overwhelm and exhaustion, maybe something that someone else does for themselves is not going to work for me. So the biggest thing I want you to think of as we go through all of these conversations and really all our episodes and all the work you do with us will always be a question of what will serve you right now, not forever, even not even maybe for the whole day, but just at this moment, what's going to serve you? What do you need? But next time, is there something else that we could offer instead that might serve you better? Okay, so instead of maybe scrolling through social media right now, I'm going to do 3 breaths. Great, that was a baby step. And then have these conversations with yourself of how you can carve out these moments of quiet and solitude for yourself and what they may look like. And again, when you feel like that critical angle coming in, that shame, like I should be doing this, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for what is your body asking for and how can you listen to it? And how can you serve yourself that moment of grace to give yourself what you need and what may nourish you in that moment? And then start the conversation with how you can carve out spaces of quiet within your life like that.
And that brings us to the second factor, which is inward looking. So now we have this quiet space. And now we have an ability to accurately look inward. And again, let's be real. A lot of people avoid this because they don't want to look inward. They don't want to feel the feelings that come up. I think all of us, if we're honest with ourselves, can identify that feeling of, I don't know if I want to deal with this right now. And so we do the other things. But it's the science that would inform us, the more that we're able to quiet down and start to look inward, the more closely we can start tracking towards creativity or solution-oriented thinking. And the research suggests that the brain's visual and auditory, so your eyes and your ears, cortex, or the area where it processes this information, start to shut out the external world just before an aha moment or insight is about to be generated. So it's built-in mechanism where your body will, and your brain more specifically, will shut out what you see and what you hear just before an aha, or I got it, or this is it moment is about to come to life. So it's the within oneself we want to look for the answer. And again, why great questions and great coaching often lead to great insights and great changes. It's not about being told what to do, but it's about listening and hearing the themes and the storylines, having enough space of quiet, offering a question that someone can go internal in a safe way to identify, and then, oh, yes, there it is. An insight comes up. So we want to really make sure that we are able to sustainably look inward in a quiet space, shutting out the external ideas and worlds as much as possible. So we give ourselves the opportunity to travel through our own thoughts and our own experiences, and therefore gain insight from our own wisdom.
Like always, I'd like to offer, baby steps or practical tools to be able to accomplish these things. And so one of my main tools that I go to often, I offer my clients, that I definitely use personally, is to be able to do this, I often need to do a brain dump before. So I grab a journal, a piece of paper, any scrap piece of paper, and I get everything out first. And on this page, I actually write on top of it over and over, so it's illegible by the end. And the reason for that is nothing that's going there is for consumption of any kind. It's really just to release what else is looping in my mind. Most likely there's many factors that are looping in your mind throughout your day, throughout your year, throughout whatever has been occurring. And to be able to carve out this space that Yasha was referring to requires us to kind of take out the garbage first and be like, okay, now what? So it's an activity I encourage you to try. Grab a scrap piece of paper and allow everything to go out of your mind. And I mean, literally writing things like, that person at the grocery store pissed me off, to I really need to get some bread, from the bakery, to whatever it is, just write and write on top of each other again, because it's less about you needing to read this or reflect on it. It's literally about you releasing it. So, I write it all out for however long I need to. I would say if you're new to this, make yourself do it at least for 30 seconds to a minute. And even if you have nothing to write, which I doubt, but if you have nothing to write that down. I have nothing to write. Isla's making me do this activity. She's pissing me off. I'm fine with that. I will go on your dump page, but write whatever you need to down. And then after a while something will flow out, and then go up to a time period that feels good to you. When you feel like you're done, you're done.
Absolutely. I think that's a great activity for someone to start getting into that quiet zone. And so then the third factor would be being in a slightly happy state. Now, I will admit, I don't love that terminology. Telling someone to be in a happy state is kind of, for me, feels like telling someone just get over it. And it's like, okay, great. The words are easily said, but how do I do it? So though that's how the researchers would describe it, I would add learning how to be in more of a grounded, or if not grounded, neutral state. If we can go from neutral then towards grounded and then towards maybe gratitude, then I think happiness is, just a neighbor around the corner that we can reach. Most of us are struggling because we're in a worried, anxious, depressed kind of state. And so what automatically happens with our extreme ways of thinking is then okay, well, Yashir said on this podcast that I have to be in a happy state. So I'm just going to be really smiley and perky and peppy and everything's great. And I would caution you against that, because that swinging from a chandelier kind of excitement actually is it's ecstatic way of thinking. It doesn't lead to more creativity. In fact, it actually could do the opposite and kind of bring you into more of a hyper state, but not necessarily a clear state. So moving towards a neutral, grounded, then grateful into happy state is the roadmap I offer for this third factor. And when we do this and do this more consistently, again, think of any activity, meditation, physical activity, artwork, music, any daily ritual that helps your nervous system get into the state, you will then be able to come up with the insights more accurately and more quickly, because it's really hard to be solution oriented when all we're focusing on are the pieces or the parts that are not working or that are holding us back. And so once we get quiet, we go inward, we step into a neutral, grounded, grateful, happy state. We're now really allowing our bodies to receive the information that comes from a flow state, as we described earlier. So before we move on to the fourth factor, Isla, what would you like to say about this third one?
Yeah, I think you're right about like the word happy being a little misleading, but I'm glad you use different words for it, like a grounded state or maybe like a solution focused state of mind. Basically, in this state, what I would say is a space of possibility. You have to be in a zone where you are betting on yourself. That's how I would put it. So happy, schmappy, whatever that means, I don't even know, right? I'm more thinking like you are willing to take the risk on yourself, on your knowing, on your goal, on your dream. What will help you enter that state? That's to me more interesting. Like, what will shift you out of this overwhelmed state to a place that you will bet on yourself, that you will bet on your future, that you will bet on your dreams, that you will take that risk? That's the question I have for you. So, what helps you do that? Is it throwing on your favorite song? Do that. But dancing around the room? Do that. It might be like having a cup of coffee for some. If you drink coffee, right? That might be it. Having some water, even, it might require something like that. It might require a walk or a workout or a stretch or a run, whatever it is. What are your tools to enter a state in which you are looking for solutions within yourself? This idea of being happy, and I'm putting this in quotes. If you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see my quotes, is that it's more about you betting on yourself, your potential, your dreams, and taking action towards that. The way you're coming into that state is, this is worth the risk to me. This is worth me trying, and I'm going to put the things in place to take this leap of faith. What will nourish that is the question. That's where I want you to stay. When we say happy state, remove that word and replace it with what will nourish me to optimize, to set me up for me betting on myself, and do that.
Absolutely. And so we're at quiet, inward looking, in a slightly happy, grounded, solution oriented way.
Mm-hmm.
And then here's the counterintuitive fourth factor. The fourth factor is not effortful.
Mm.
And so it's the idea of action of non-action, which is a Chinese philosophy of Taoism, is doing by not doing. And what's fascinating about this is you're now telling me, after I do all these things, you want me not to do anything about it. And it's more of a philosophy in how you go about it than constantly grinding at the same impasse. Because again, you have to leave room for divergent, disconnected ideas to come together. But if you constantly are thinking of the same problem in the same way, you're going to have the same results. Think about how many times you come up with an insight when you are going for a walk, going for a drive, taking a shower, sitting on the toilet, as we always make jokes about. How many times your brain comes up with a solution? You're not actively maybe thinking about that problem, but an idea pops up. And the reason for that is because your brain will continuously work on the problem, even without your conscious recognition, because it wants to close the thought loop. It doesn't want to leave it open-ended. And in fact, that's why when we don't have an answer to something, it could feel maddening the more we think about it, because you're consciously going through the same process, through getting the same answers, and the thought loop is not complete. We want resolution. One of the ways to have resolution, outside of the three ways that we just mentioned it, is to actually let it go a little bit. Loosen your grip on the I need the answer today, right now feeling, and surrender to the idea. Remember, struggle, surrender to it a little bit, and maybe walk away from it. Come back at it from a different angle in a few minutes after you've gone for a walk or had a conversation with someone, or as Isla said, picked up another activity.
Absolutely. So I did offer that, example earlier about me, when I was at an impasse moving towards like playing with fonts for a logo. What is that for yourself? What is something that is kind of, what is your doodle pad, or like, going to do something else to not distract yourself, but allow your brain to take a little rest from the current loop it's on to move towards something else. I think ultimately what this also means is definitely a type of surrender. I think it's a trust fall that you are constantly doing with yourself and the universe when you do this type of work. It's trusting that, again, if this is meant to be born through you, it will be. And so the control and the attachment to certain outcomes will actually hinder our creativity and hinder what it's meant to be born as. So it's definitely a work in progress. I struggle with it all the time, with this vision that I have. And then when it's not falling into line, I want to like push it into like, why go in this direction? And every time I'm taught, no, that's not how this works. So it's no different here. It doesn't mean you give up on your goal. It means that your goal might be reimagined. It means that you give space for it to look a different way. It means that you might have to provide it a different timeline. You don't know how the timeline of things are meant to be. What you know is that you keep showing up as the best version of you that can, in alignment with the parts of you that you love most, and you make choices from that place. And you do that trust fall and that surrender with yourself and the universe. And ultimately, you're betting on your whole self. You're betting on your darkness and your struggle and your confusion and your overwhelm, and you're betting on your light. And both are going to exist in tandem. And your whole self is going to produce what it's meant to produce if you are taking that risk to say, hey, I am both light and dark. This is both hard and easy. And the vision and the dream I have for my future is worth this risk. Let's go. Thank you for listening, friends. What shifted for you during this episode? We'd love to hear your insights. Write us with any questions, commentary, or episode ideas at theshift@mindshiftleadership.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, we would deeply appreciate a like and subscribe.
The Shift is brought to you by MindShift Leadership, a heart-centered, evidence-based, mindset-powered leadership company, empowering you with the training to prioritize mental health, inclusion, and performance optimization.